In this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 worst houses you could ever buy. Now imagine this, you're going to buy your first property. It might be your first home, it could be an investment property. So you do what most people do, you head online and you just start looking at properties. And generally you might look at properties that are a bit on the cheaper side. You find one that looks okay, you go to the open house, and even though you're feeling a little bit of a knot in your stomach, you put that all down to nerves because everyone gets nervous when they're about to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single purchase, but you decide to feel the fear and do it anyway. You buy the house, but then a few years go by and you start to notice a few things wrong. Perhaps it needs a new roof and that sets you back 25 grand, a massive surprise cost. Maybe you didn't realize there was ground rent or body corp that sets you back 10 grand a year. Or maybe the house just didn't go up in value as fast as the properties surrounding it. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ed, an economist and property investor here at Opes Partners. And because I talk about property on TV, the radio, and I write for the national newspapers, people like you share their stories about the properties they bought that didn't quite work out. And that's where this list of the top 5 worst houses you could ever buy comes from. People like you sharing the mistakes, and I just want to help you avoid those same mistakes. And in the number 1 spot, I've got leasehold properties. So this property looks cheap. It's got an asking price of just $299K, and it's 2 bedrooms, so it could rent for around $800 a week. That is a lot of rent compared to the purchase price, and that effectively means that it has got a really, really high gross yield. But you also need to look at the expenses, which for this property, because it's a leasehold apartment, are really, really high. It's got body corp of 7.5 grand per year and ground rent of almost 12K a year. Because when it comes to leasehold properties, you might own the building, but you don't own the land underneath, and that's why they're cheap. But they also have really, really high costs because you still have to pay rent to the landowner. And that ground rent tends to increase by a lot. In this one example, this property owner here saw their ground rent go up by a massive 133% in a single year. And that's why these sorts of properties don't tend to go up in value by as much as other types of properties, maybe not at all. And that's why many of the investors I talk to regret buying leasehold properties. They might be cheap, but they're often nasty too. In the same cheap and nasty category, I'm also going to put hotel rooms. So this is where you might buy a room in a hotel and you rent it back to the hotel operator. Now there are 2 issues with this. Some hotels set it up so that you get a percentage of any money they make when they rent out your specific hotel room. Now that all sounds good in theory, but if the economy suffers like it did during COVID, all of a sudden you don't have any rent and there's not much you can do about it. Or what happens if they rent the room that's next to your one, but not your specific room? Again, you don't have a lot of control over your income. So if you do decide to buy a hotel room as an investment, make sure you've got a contract with the hotel where you get paid whether that room is empty or not. And just keep in mind that this is a yield property. So that means that hotel rooms will get more rental income, but it likely won't go up in value quite as fast. And if you'd like to see more of these what not to invest in videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. That's how I know whether these are the sorts of videos you want to see more of. And honestly, it really just helps out the YouTube algorithm. So if you wouldn't mind, thank you so much. Or subscribing as well, that helps too. We are almost at our goal of growing the channel to 20,000 subscribers. Another common property that people ask about is bare land. And that's where you buy a bit of dirt that doesn't have anything on it. And people buy land for a lot of reasons. I remember I was on the phone to an investor a couple of years ago and she said, Ed, I've been watching your YouTube videos and I want to talk to you about my situation. My income isn't big, I've got my own home and I've also got this bit of land. And my dream is to build on it. And once we talked through some of the numbers, I said to her, look, I'm not a financial advisor, this isn't formal financial advice, but you really don't have enough income, enough money to build a house on this. You could get the money from the bank to buy the bit of dirt, but not actually to build anything on it. And that's where people sometimes get stuck because they can do step 1. They can get enough money from the bank to buy the bit of land, but not enough money for step 2 where you actually get the money and build something on it and actually get the returns from property. And in the meantime, you're paying your local council rates on this section, but you don't have any rental income. And if you don't have any rental income, the money you borrowed against that land isn't tax deductible, and that's where it all starts to become a bit of a dog's breakfast. Along a similar vein are studio apartments, and this really comes into that cheap and nasty category again. It's where you buy a single apartment that is usually pretty small and the bedroom is actually in the lounge, like in this example. Now, these can often work by renting them out to single people who want a lower rent and don't need as much space. Now, this one again is on the cheaper side. It's got a capital value of $290,000 and rents for $495 a week. And again, that has a really, really good gross yield of just under 9%. But here's the fishhook. This apartment is only 36 square meters, and some banks like ASB won't let you borrow as much money against a small apartment like this. Usually when you buy a house, you might only need a 20 or 30% deposit based on whether it's your own home, a new build, or an investment property. So if you bought this apartment for $290K, usually you'd only need a deposit between $58,000 and up to $87,000. But since this one is under 40 square meters, you might need up to a 50% deposit, which is almost up to $145K. Then you've got a choice. If you've got a $145K deposit, you could either buy a small $290,000 studio apartment that might not go up in value as fast, or you could instead purchase a $725K larger property that's more livable, and that's probably got a better shot at going up in value. And you might notice that when I'm running numbers and showing you graphs today, I'm using a new app to run my analysis. I've just launched Opes Plus, which is a free app that you can use to run the numbers on any property in New Zealand, and you can sign up and add unlimited properties for free at opespartners.co.nz. I'd also avoid investing in really small towns like Manaia and South Taranaki, which has a population of just 1,000 people. Now, the great thing about a place like Manaia is that properties are really cheap. So if I jump into Area Analyzer, which is another free tool I've just launched, you can get free property data for any suburb in the country. And if we jump in, we can see that the average house value for Manaia is just under $338,000, which is really cheap. And again, the cheaper the properties, the higher the rental yield, an average of 7.7% in Manaia. And look, if you want to use any of the free tools I've mentioned in this video, I'll just drop all the links down in the description. Now, the trouble with all of this is that in such a small community like Manaia, even though it is a really lovely place to live, it doesn't matter how good your property is sometimes. You've got a really limited pool of renters because there's not many people that live in that community, and not everybody is hunting around for a new rental property all the time. So you can get very long periods of vacancy where your property is empty and you're not earning any rent, and it can be really hard to find a good tenant.